America's exhibition Baseline to have Hal Foster and Cameron in conversation. You're doing a walkthrough and speaking about the work. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you both.
Thanks. Thanks, Emma. Okay.
So I have a few questions, and then eventually we hope to open it up to you all. I think the first question, especially given this work, is how the hell did you make it? I mean, what's the process? Is there a particular piece that you can unpack for us?
Okay, well, in terms of process, I would say the beginning of the process is what we all do, being in the world, looking at things that attract me, and I take a lot of pictures of different kinds of graphic elements that appear in the world, and I don't ever directly appropriate them, but then they kind of go into my image bank, and then some version of them comes out. And the majority of the time, I then draw them in the computer and start to make compositions. Well, I sort of work in two different ways. If I make a painting where I draw the composition out entirely and then execute it, then the next time I make a painting, I just have one kind of move that I have in mind and then add to that. Because for a long time I made work where I did everything. I made all the preparatory drawings and then would just spend months executing the painting, and I started to feel like I was a human Xerox machine. And so to try to counteract that and not fall into that rut, I work in these different ways. So,
Amy, it's one violation.
Yeah. So I make these drawings in the computer, and then the elements of the drawings get output to an architectural plotter that's been fitted with a blade that cuts stencils for me. And those get applied to the canvas in different layers, and then the paint is put on using a whole bunch of different techniques. Sometimes it's sprayed, sometimes it's put on with a trowel, sometimes I even use a brush, but not very often. So yeah, that's,
wow.
Yeah.
You know, it interests me that they come sometimes out of glimpses in the world. Said, you know, Jasper Johns said the same thing about his crosshatch paintings and not cobblestone, but whatever those stone motifs are.
Yeah.
He just saw them and became obsessed.
Yeah.
Actually, we have a collage right here. Amy Silman, in a terrific conversation with Cameron, talked about the non-embodied space of these paintings. And you talk about how you wanted them just to appear. But the collages are quite different. Can you talk about the difference?
Yeah. Well, so I think what I said to Amy was that I want for the paintings to feel like they just appeared on the canvas. So that there isn't a kind of trace of a struggle to get there. And part of that is because I want for them to be slightly confounding in terms of what they are when you encounter them, where certainly they present themselves as being paintings because they're on traditional painting supports and they're on canvas. But then a lot of people seem to think that there's a printing process that's involved. There is not. They're all made by hand. And I want there to be this kind of collapse between the handmade and the mechanical. And then I think the collages operate slightly differently just by virtue of the fact that they are materially very different. And collage, I think, never completely transcends itself. You are always aware that it is pieces of paper on another piece of paper. And I also take slightly different liberties with the collages in that, when I said before, I don't directly appropriate anything in the paintings. In the collages, like this one is made, the kind of chartreuse part of it is made from 2 invitation cards for Paul Pake's last show at Miguel Abreu Gallery. So I'm a little more fast and loose in terms of like using material that has a more concrete kind of referent out in the world and then manipulating it.
Yeah, I think Amy said that you can cut your finger, or you can imagine you could if you went along the collages, but never in this world.
Yeah.
So talk about the line or the varieties of line in the paintings. I think in conversation with you, Laura in the gallery came up with a great list that they call inexhaustive.
Yeah.
A line is an outline of a figure as such, a pathway, a glyph, a form of writing, or a stand-in for another gesture. I mean, that's a lot right there, but can you help us out with the line and how you think about line?
So the line became a thematic element that wasn't totally conscious when I started making this body of work, but I started to see it reoccur. And then once I became conscious of it, I tried to make paintings where the line operated differently from painting to painting. So that list that Laura came up with after a conversation we had relates to different ways that I think about line being employed within the show. Like the line is always, well, we were talking about this before we started, but I think of the line as always being kind of in relief in relationship to an idea of gesture, which is not to say that it's in quotes, it's not ironic, but it is slightly distanced from the kind of baggage that gets attached to certain kinds of gestural marks. And then, obviously, in each painting, line functions differently in the sense that, like, I think of a painting like this, the line functions more like a figure and a figure-ground relationship. In the painting that's in the front, the line has this kind of autographic quality where it feels like it's maybe a signature or an initial, but it's not my signature or initial. In the one behind you all there, the line is more like a kind of pathway or labyrinth or something like that. So trying to think about these different valences that line might have and how we read them.
Just a quick follow-up on line. Early abstractionists really hated the idea that abstraction would be taken as ornamental or decorative. But you go there. I mean, you embrace the ornamental, the serpentine, the ribbon. Can you?
Yeah.
It's just another line for you.
Yeah, and I don't want to, or I want to be inclusive of all kinds of different vocabularies and not kind of shy away from something that might be read as decorative or ornamental because it's supposedly taboo. I think we're encountering information like this all the time in the world. So yes, the ribbon-like forms in some of these paintings have this more kind of, at least initially, kind of decorative aspect to them. Whereas in a painting like the one that's right here, I was thinking about line more as it related to, or all of the kind of signifiers that are in this painting as they might be related to something like information graphics, which is obviously something that we are bombarded with all the time, and it's presented as a way of making information concrete, but I would say in a lot of cases it makes it more abstract.
Right.
So, yeah.
We talk about information that comes to us in all these different forms, but you still use the language of a painter, figure, ground.
Yeah.
We can see a little bit how the figures disturb because of the change in our informational world. Can you talk a little bit about the ground in these paintings? At first, it seems, well, some seem quite emphatic. They seem very present, almost flat, and then that flatness becomes dimensional. But talk about the ground, because it does really vary.
Yeah.
Painting, depending on cluster to cluster.
But that contradiction that you just articulated, a kind of dimensional flatness, is something that I'm really interested in trying to exploit. And so there are different kinds of grounds in different paintings, certainly, but if there's something that pervades all of them, I think what I'm after is an image that when you first encounter it, because of the graphic nature of the way the paint is put on and the colors, it has this kind of snap to it where you think that you get it. And then if you spend time with it, that ground starts to kind of dissipate and shift and become much less stable than you might have thought that it was in the beginning. So I think also in a number of the paintings, I tried to employ something where the figure and the ground don't very naturally occupy the same space, right? So in a painting like that, for instance, there's a way that, while it might hopefully have that impact of seeming like something that clicks or you understand it as a picture or an image, if you spend time with it, it starts to kind of fall apart, and you recognize that how you might see those ribbon-like forms in that particular space is really hard to understand how it would be grounded, to use your word.
Yeah, maybe ground is not the right word. I mean, you also have spoken about layers.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which I think, as many of us look at these paintings, we think about a person very schooled in grab and drag, graphic automatisms, like what we all do, even old fucks like me. So can you talk about how that has revised what you think about as figure and ground? As Picasso once said famously, the reason why he didn't go abstract is that any mark on a support is already a figure against the ground.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I think, to me, the abstraction to representation continuum, there is one, but at the same time, I don't think things ever fall, or at least for me, they don't fall into something that I would call purely abstract because of precisely what you're talking about. So one of the things I talked about in my Art in America talk with Amy was the idea that there was a certain point in my life where I shifted from making very representational pictures to making these things that I thought were more abstract. But what I came to recognize is that the kind of logic of an image is still totally embedded in how I make every painting that I make. And so, to me, I guess if we had to say whether these things were abstract or representational, we might say they were abstract, but I don't know. Is that right? I don't think so. You know.
Yeah, it seems to me that that old binary doesn't really apply here.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's always impressive when work compels a revision in language, a critical language, art historical language even. You know, you mentioned that at first things seem fairly obvious and then they're anything but. One point for me is where this occurs is you see traces of shadows, but the shadows begin to be detached from whatever object they might correspond with. So that leads me to ask, you know, what kinds of signs are in play here? You talked about line, ground. What is a sign for you, or what different kinds of signs did you want to activate?
So I think a lot about this term that I came up with that I call almost signs, which is to me a place where, and after the 2 interviews that I did in this show, I promise that I will never use the word signifier and signified again. But I am going to use it right now.
That's a promise that will be broken.
Yes, because it came up a lot. But I think a lot about moments that we encounter in culture where there is an almost sign, which to me is a place where the signifier and the signified don't quite match up, right? Where there's a way that what happens is a kind of associative read, where there is a signifier, but you can't concretely say that is that thing, right? And that's sort of if I think about my version of abstraction, I think that's where I land on that. So I want for the signs, or the almost signs, to have this kind of similar instability to what I was talking about with the ground, where they allow for multiple different readings or interpretations to be possible at once. So they're not necessarily entirely concrete. So like even when I talk about the forms in a painting like that, or in the painting that's in the front of the gallery, I don't call those forms ribbons. I keep calling them ribbon-like things, or ribbon glyphs, or, you know, I never want to land on the idea that it is concretely something that we can entirely name.
Right. I think in one of the interviews you also say that you are the last champion of semiotics. So let me take one further run there.
Yeah.
Classic model of semiotics, Charles Peirce, American pragmatist, said there are three kinds of signs.
Right.
Iconic, so the image resembles a thing in the world. Indexical, the representation bears the trace of its making.
Right.
And symbolic, where the image is somehow in a conventional relation to a referent. We get it that way. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that, I like the idea of almost, but it seems to me that your signs negate those three possibilities, or they avert those three possibilities. And I don't really have a name for what kind of sign it is that you play with, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think but to me, it's the almost sign. Like, that's as close as I can come to that. But I am all ears if you have a better term.
I will steal that idea and use it in my future work. Okay. This gets, in a way, back to process, because you do efface the making, the marking, the bodily, but maybe not entirely. I mean, you talk, actually it's in the press release, about paradoxical notions of handmade mechanization, dimensional flatness, illustrative abstraction. And in your conversation with Amy, you talk about a collapse between what seems to be animate and what seems to be inanimate. For me, the thing that most strikes me about your work is that they seem utterly composed and utterly random at the same time. So can you talk about this kind of ambition, this aim at paradoxicality?
If they seem random, I assure you they are not.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Well, we talked about this collage that you.
Yeah.
Go on.
So I was here with someone the other day, and they were saying to me that, and I'm not sure this is right, this is just their interpretation, but they were saying that the paintings have this kind of presence where it feels like everything is exactly where it's supposed to be, but that the collages gave this person this sense, and they did this really specific thing where they went like this with their finger, and they said, you could move that dot somewhere else. And which I thought was funny because, of course, the dot is glued down. But I think it's this kind of imagination of you being the maker of the thing. And the collages maybe allow for that more than the paintings do, in the sense that a lot of people say, and I just explained to you how I get to making the paintings, but a lot of people seem kind of confounded by how the paintings are made. Right? That's a response that I've had from a lot of people, other painters even. They say, I just don't know how you did the thing that you did. But I think that possibly makes for a situation where the picture feels more kind of fixed in a way, and that the collages do something that invokes something more playful. I don't know. But in terms of that contradiction, I spend an incredible amount of time trying to find the composition that embodies this paradox that you're talking about, where it seems like there's, in certain cases, a kind of arbitrariness to the way that the things land on the canvas. Mm-hmm. But again, it's anything but.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's often the case. I know we shouldn't use this term, but often the case with abstract painting. People think it's somewhat arbitrary, if not random. It's just, why this, why not that?
Yeah.
But the best abstraction, it never is. I mean, but that doesn't mean that it's all calculated. I mean, artists like Mondrian's highly intuitive.
Uh-huh.
The late paintings, unfinished paintings, full of tape, painted over, moved around. I mean, I get it, I think. Where do I want to go from here? Oh, in terms of this desire to tarry in paradox, for you there's a political dimension to this the state, this almost sign, a sign that never rests, never lands on a meaning that's fixed. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because that was obscure to me.
Well, I guess I'm a little reluctant to attribute it to politics expressly, but I guess I do think there is a way in which there's a politic that's involved in that I think we are living in a time when, or let's just call it what it is, we're living under an administration that is advocating for a kind of fixity of meaning, and that is grounded in supposedly in values, which I think are anything but values. But there's a way that they're advocating for an idea that there's a correct set of parameters that everyone is supposed to follow, right? And we all know that that also means that many people are excluded from rights that they should have, et cetera. So I think if there's a political dimension to it, it's advocating for this idea that we should have an openness to meaning, that we should have an ability to construct meaning ourselves and not have it be constructed for us.
I didn't think that's where you were headed with that one, but...
Well, what did you think?
Oh, wait. I think maybe it was still in the conversation with Amy that you talked about how Trump actually never lands on a meaning, and
right.
that allows him never to be questioned on a meaning. And I was interested that, one could take that, let's call it bullshitting rather than paradoxicality as a problem that we all share, and that
right.
your project of the almost sign is a way to kind of deal with that condition of language and representation now and do a very different thing with it.
Yeah, that actually came from the conversation that I had with Marcus Sivan.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, Trump's favorite expression is, "we'll see," right? This is what he says anytime anyone asks him to nail something down. And I think there's a way in which the right has kind of instrumentalized a relationship to language that is, I mean, they're very good at it. So to imagine a way of embracing that kind of position, which isn't to me about telling things that are untrue, but changing a relationship to meaning construction, that's maybe where I see the political dimension.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just have one or two more questions. Okay. And in a way, it's a turn to the historical to an extent. I mean, I'm of the generation of the pictures artists, and I know that they really informed you as a young artist.
Absolutely.
And there is a certain tension in your conversations, especially, different people, between a kind of picture orientation and a painting orientation. It seems to me that this might be another opposition that you undo, but people in my cohort really drank the Benjamin Kool-Aid that mechanical reproduction, even more digital reproduction, undoes painting, as maybe the fifth or sixth iteration of the death of painting in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that you want to reverse that order of things and think about the ways in which painting can reflect on other kinds of sign making, other kinds of representational systems, technological and not. Yeah. And I think I sense, this may seem grandiose, and you're a modest person, so you will deny it, but there's a certain meta-pictorial ambition in your work. Can you affirm or deny?
No, I think that's true. I mean, in a lot of the paintings, it maybe is not entirely obvious at first, but there is a way that, like, shapes that feel like they might fall into the arbitrary are often like derived out of negative space from another form in the painting, or like in this one, the kind of template that is formed by this gray part is cut out from the outline of this shape and then other shapes. And there's a way that, like this is a picture when you were talking about the traces of shadows before, in terms of like the destabilization thing. I think when you first see this picture, it feels like it kind of adds up because, or maybe, in part because the shadows imply that there is something representational that's taking place. But then if you spend time with it, you come to understand that like the shadows for the template are actually reversed from the shadows of the marks that are in the middle of the thing. So that's like a subtle way that you may or may not be cognizant of, that the ground becomes kind of destabilized. In terms of meta pictures, when I was here the other day, I was talking with someone, and an artist that I know walked by, and he said, "Great ghost marks." I thought, oh, that's not really a term that I would have thought, but it did resonate with me. And you'll also notice that in a number of the paintings, there are these kinds of things that, like in this painting, and you'll see this kind of these bands of color that are not necessarily evident when you first stand in front of the painting, but then come up as you spend time in front of it. And part of that is a desire to kind of have a payoff for longer viewing, because all of our attention spans are so short now, it's really hard to get anyone to look at anything for very long. But I think it also has some bearing on this idea of like a meta picture, like a picture within the picture.
What's the relation between, is it ghost marks?
That's what he said, yeah.
And almost signs. It's not a trick question. It's a real question.
Interesting. I guess I think of the ghost marks, if we're going to call them that, as potentially being traces of something that might have been there before, right? I mean, you mentioned in one of our conversations this idea of the palimpsest, and I like that as a possibility of there being a kind of sometimes not entirely discernible residue of another kind of image that might have been there before. So in a way, that's also something that doesn't quite add up to being a sign, right? Because it's a trace of it, but it's not fully concrete or fully material.
Yeah, and I like that idea of trace. Art historically, your work, the show, reminds me of that extraordinary moment in Picasso right around 1912 when he could go abstract, and most artists who took on his work at that point did go abstract, but it's really a moment where he kind of opens his work up to different sign systems. So there'll be traces of different signs, and actually different sign systems. Like there'll be a cubist wine glass with shadowing, but that modeling will then drift away from the object and then kind of exist in its own right as a sign maybe of shadowing. But he'll put into play, and often these are just little collages, 4 or 5 different sign systems, musical score, just a couple of collaged elements that will signify a guitar or a violin, newspaper scrap, piece of wallpaper. And the very first painting really evoked, that moment in Picasso for me. Actually, one collage in particular. You place it there as a key in a way. I mean, or maybe not. Can you talk about? It's in the other room.
We can
just
go in
go
there, I think.
over there?
Yeah, sure. Can we all fit in there?
In
I did very intentionally put this in as sort of the first thing that you might see when you come into the show. Not necessarily as a key in the sense of like spelling everything out, but maybe giving some indication of like elements you might encounter when you walk through the show, right? So as I said before, the line in this case, or one of the lines in this case, is this kind of initial, and it's intentionally done in such a way that it looks a little bit like a letter, but what specific letter it is ambiguous. And it's interesting how people project different things onto that. I've had several people tell me like, oh, I love the L, or I love the F. You know, I'm like, okay.
It's a G. Everyone knows it's a G.
Yeah. So I like the idea of right away having like one of the kind of ways of thinking about line as being writing or signature or autograph or something. But again, not my autograph necessarily. And then, you know, the pattern that is on the sort of background of the space of the painting, I thought about, it's a pattern that I made up, but I thought about it being almost like the inside of a security envelope or something. Or it could be similar to the gray pattern in there. It could have this presence of being sort of like fabric of some sort. And then, the painting also, I should say, the painting is called Sanction. And I like that title because sanction is this word that kind of means one thing and its opposite, right? And of course, I was also thinking about sanctions and what is being sanctioned and in this present moment. So yeah, I don't know if that speaks exactly to what you're talking about, but certainly different kinds of sign systems being within the same kind of rectangle, you know, and making for.
Yeah, I mean, really simply, you know, painting, there are a few old paradigms in our Western tradition. Window, mirror, abstract, field. But you're onto a different thing. Other artists are too.
Yeah. And
this gets back to the metapictorial. It's more like a mosaic or a template. You know, it's so I'm interested to know, and this is really the last question, what you take to be nature. What is the first order of experience for you? Is it it's not the world that we see through a window or that reflects from a mirror. What's the world behind the scrim of your painting? Or what is the...
God, that's a complicated question. I knew I shouldn't have invited Hal Foster.
Well, you can get back to every one of us individually. Yeah. We'll leave emails and...
Handwritten notes. Okay.
10,000 words. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, my first answer is I don't know how to answer that question, Hal. It's incredibly complicated. I guess I think that we are at a point in history where it is so difficult to discern what nature might be that that all we have is, or all we can do is try to process the many different interfaces through which we are provided with experience. Mm-hmm. And so if the paintings can try to speak to that, at least tangentially, and obviously I don't want it to be a very one-to-one kind of relationship, but if they can touch on that sensibility or way that we encounter the world, then great. And that's what motivates me to make the things that I make. So yeah, that's the best I can do on the spot.
That's a beautiful answer. You want to take questions or comments?
Sure, yeah.
I have a question about color choice in this.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there are a lot of optical things that go on,
yep.
meaning the subtle shadows, for example, that suddenly appear. But in this one, you seem to have chosen colors that play against each other exactly perfectly so that when your eye moves off the blue,
mm-hmm.
the yellow shadow gets repeated in that retinal effect.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be the only one that has such an overt and specific optical device. Is that deliberate? Was that just how it just developed organically, or?
Well, I would say in this painting maybe more than in some of the others, thinking about that idea of ghost marks, you know, that there are, I was trying for it to have this effect where the kind of shift within this circular form and the things that are off register in there are so subtle that you're not really sure whether you're seeing it or your eye is imagining it, that it's a kind of optical conundrum that you don't know how real it is. There are other places I would say in the show where I tried to do that, but you're right that this is maybe slightly different, and that happened in part because of what you're talking about the color relationships. So yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, but yeah, David.
Question maybe related to that a bit, thinking about this kind of central paradox between like the material of the painting and the image, which maybe tips towards virtuality or something that maybe is in the world. But I'm thinking about like the work that you do, like the labor, or maybe even thinking of these as an effect of behavior. And I'm wondering, like, how would you spin a story or account for like the meaning of behavior, of which these are
We'd have to call my shrink to talk about that, I think. But
you are collaborating with machines. There's a kind of unselfish dimension to it.
yeah.
But it's still driven underneath that with the motivation to self.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that is one of the kind of contradictions of the whole thing, I think. It's a really good question. Also complicated answer. Do you have an answer to the question?
Oh, no.
No,
Your
don't be
shrink
sorry.
is right here.
We'll talk later.
I mean, yeah, this is interesting because there is a way in which I feel like something that I am after is about taking myself out of the equation, a kind of distance, right? And even when I say like, oh, it's an initial, but it's not my initial, right? Like I'm kind of standing back from it. But then there is always the fact that I am a painter who works by myself in my studio, making these things that I want to make look like they just appeared on the canvas, and yet they take an incredible amount of labor to make them look like that, right?
That's the core of my question.
Yeah, so all of those contradictions are built into the work itself, I think, you know, and an embrace of those contradictions. Assessing the behavior, I got to get back to you on that one, but I like it as a question. Nedry?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is really a question exactly, but I stood looking a long time at that one, and I was thinking about contradiction, and then I started moving along with the other ones, and I was thinking that the tonality of the background seems critical to what's happening on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're presented with one thing that seems very cohesive, it's like very graphic sign, and then everything that's going on behind it is disrupting that.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, like in something like this, if you walk along, you see that the actual lines of the grid change in tonality, so then you're kind of caught up in that. You're disembodied by that.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of being disembodied seems to happen in different ways with different pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question was, like, even looking at this one, I was thinking that patterning in the background, the saturation of the tonality in the middle feels closer to me. So it actually feels like it's on a loop towards me, and yet it's got a flat circle on the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is that just like you're working, it's happening, you're not thinking about it, it's just in there? Or is that part of like a planned, thought out?
I think there's always a a toggle back and forth, right? I mean, when I'm working, there's a way that I'm consciously trying to put certain things into the painting, and then there are things that just happen as a result of, you know, things.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the painting that we were talking about before, the painting that's called Graphic, that has the line and that sort of loops like this. For some reason that I don't understand, if you stand in front of that painting, I promise it is a perfectly square canvas, but it looks like a trapezoid,
Yeah.
right? It looks like one side is longer than another, and that's just a result of that particular gradient with that warped grid, or I don't even know what. And so there are these things that kind of just happen that I don't totally have control
It
over.
feels like a weird breathing space.
A weird what?
Breathing space, like
Uh-huh.
painting, like within that envelope.
Yeah.
Painting is kind of breathing.
Oh, I like that. Nice. Yeah, Ohad.
We might have talked about it another thing, but also about the following up on the computer thing. It's hard for me not to see you look at a particular time in history. I'm not going back to Picasso, but I'm actually looking at early computer graphics, like the 80s, where we start like through the color scheme, but also this aesthetic of like something that is demonstrating a tool. It's not about like those iPhone ads where like shot of an iPhone something. We're not looking at the picture of the baby, we're looking about a new tool that's being offered to us, which shows us something about maybe what we like to take pictures of. And you're kind of looking, going back to, I'm wondering, what do you think about that moment and this moment? Because we're kind of like in another crossroad in image making. That was a very, and that one, for me, would read an optimistic moment. Like, here's this new tool, look what you could do with it. You can go back to painting. It actually makes us rethink what is visual imagery and how does it work. And now maybe it's not as optimistic as, I don't know.
I mean, I would say that part of the kind of sensibility of the paintings comes from that moment that you're talking about and the generation that I'm from and when I became a more visually aware person, right? And so I talked in one of the interviews I did about how growing up in skateboard culture, I really came to understand this idea of layering through the way that certain kinds of graphic presentations were made, and also through independent music also. But so I think in a way, not even entirely in a conscious way, that sort of is my aesthetic, and that just comes out in the work. There's another way in which I feel very leery of trying to be too present tense about technology in terms of these kinds of tools that you're talking about, because I think we see a lot of work where if it's trying to address the moment that we're in right now in terms of that technology, there's a way that by the time it hits the floor, it's already dated, you know? So maybe it's a little bit of a kind of way that having just a little bit of distance from the technology and I don't necessarily think of the work as being optimistic entirely. I think that's maybe another contradiction that's built into it, is that like it presents itself as having this kind of maybe optimism that also dissipates if you spend more time with it. So yeah, that's a bunch of different thoughts about your question, but if you want to follow up if I'm not answering you.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's optimistic because it gives me a place to actually, like, to just think about attention. Like, somehow it will give me a little moment that I can lose myself.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, that I was very self-conscious about that, making this show at this time, right? When there's so much that's so heavy in the world, and there is the possibility of this being interpreted as light, or, you know, because of the color, because of the graphic nature, you know, because of the particular signs that I'm trying to play with. And that's still not, I mean, that's just always a tension that we deal with as artists, right? Is, you know, how are we addressing the moment that we're in, or are we? Anyone else? Josiah.
If I would describe these paintings, I would describe them as not being on or of or in the surface, and then almost like you can't find the surface. And when you get very close, it suddenly becomes not quite the painting. It's like you need to take a step back, and then I don't know where it starts and stops. What do you think about surface in your work?
Well, I guess I think that there is something about surface that is important to me in the sense that I want for the paintings to be better, whatever that means, when you're standing in front of the actual thing as opposed to looking at a JPEG of it. So there's something about its material construction that I think communicates something different than just an image would. And whenever I've had people who say, I think these things are printed, my response is, okay, try that, let's see how that works. If that's really possible to get the same effect, I would be willing to investigate that, but I don't think it is. So the surface it's not an intensely embodied surface, obviously, but I do think there is something about the fact that there is paint on the canvas that works differently than it would be if it was ink on the canvas or a photographic process or something like that. So I think maybe I'm trying to get a surface that is not something you see all the time, right? Like that's a way in which I'm trying to sort of distinguish the paintings from other kinds of paintings that are in the world. So, yeah. We done?
In the interest of time,
Yes.
just so that everyone can spend some time looking
Yeah.
at this conversation, we could wrap it up.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Hal. This was so meaningful to me that you did this, and thank you all for coming.